So today I will be sharing with you how I make my stew pork with butter cassava. In front of me is a pack of pork which I'm about to season, so we're going to start off by doing that first. And I am just going to remove the pork out of the packaging and place it into the bowl that I have in the sink. So the pork is in the bowl right now, and now I'm just going to add a little bit of vinegar. Next, I am going to squeeze the juice of a lime in there as well. Like that, and then I'm just going to mix everything around. Like that, and I'm just going to add a little bit of water. And drain the excess water out. I'm going to add a little more water. Mix it up again for a second time. And again, drain the excess water. In front of me I have about 12 cloves of garlic, which I am about to just roughly crush and chop and then add to the pork. I love using plenty garlic when I'm cooking. So I'm just So now I'm just going to add this to the pork. Next, I am going to be cutting up half of an onion to add to the pork. Just roughly chopping up the onions. Now I am about to add the onions to the pork as well. So I just finished rinsing off a few of these scallion or chives, whatever you call it, and I'm just going to remove the ends. So I'm just going to remove this part of it before I start cutting it in small pieces. So I'm going to discard this and start cutting these in really small pieces. About that size. So I'm going to add the scallions to the pork as well. I am going to add about 5 to 6 leaves of the shadow benny. In some places they refer to it as cilantro. And this is going to add a punch of flavor to the pork as well. So the rest of ingredients that I will be adding to the pork, it's a little bit of salt, also some of my Creole seasoning, some Cajun seasoning, a little bit of Old Bay. Because I do not have any fresh thyme, I will be using the dry thyme, so this will be added. And last but not least, I am going to crush a few of these whole black pepper. If you have ground black pepper, that will work fine. So let's start adding these ingredients to the pork. So for the salt, I'm just going to take a pinch of salt, about that much. Next, for the Cajun seasoning, I am just using about this much. I'm using the fine side of the dispenser for the Old Bay and just putting a little of that in there as well. That should be sufficient. Next, I am going in with the Creole seasoning. And I am going to use the side that have the holes and just drizzle a little of that as well into the bowl. That should be enough. For the thyme, I am just going to drizzle a bit of that as well, probably about 1 teaspoon. And last but not least, I am going to add a few of these whole black pepper into my mortar, and I will be slightly crushing that, so about this amount. And I'm just going to start grinding that a bit and add to the bowl. Now I'm going in with my hands and I'm just going to start mixing everything and making sure both sides of the pork is saturated with the seasoning and coated with the seasoning as well. So usually I also add my green seasoning, but because I don't have any, this is what I will be using for today. Now that the pork is fully seasoned, I went ahead and placed a piece of saran wrap on the top of the bowl. So what I'm going to do is place this in the refrigerator and leave it to marinate overnight so that all the seasoning can take a time to absorb into the meat. In front of me I have all the ingredients for the butter cassava. On the left we have, this is the chives or the scallions, whatever you call it. Then we have the butter, garlic. In the back we have onion, and of course we have the cassava. I already have a pot on the fire with some water, so I am just waiting for it to start boiling before I start placing the cassava into the pot to boil. So in front of me I have the cassava, and I'm just going to show you how you have to peel the cassava. I'm going to remove just the ends on both sides. And next I am just going to take the knife and press into the skin lightly, and I'm just going to do that until I reach to the bottom part of the cassava. So just lightly like that, and then I'm just going to take the knife and slightly start removing the skin of the cassava. So once you do that, the skin is supposed to be able to remove very easily, as you can see. So I'm going to continue removing the rest of skin on the rest of the cassava as well, and I will be back. Once all the skin is removed, this is what the cassava is supposed to look like, and usually all I do is just take the knife and just cut it in the center like this. Okay, so now I finished completely cleaning all the skin off the cassava. I'm just going to make sure and rinse it off properly before I put it into the pot to start boiling. Here we have the cassava in the water. It should take about 20 to 25 minutes to fully cook. I will be using a fork to monitor it right before I drain it, just to make sure that the cassava is fully cooked before I remove it off of the stove. So now it's time to monitor the cassava, and as you can see, it's starting to soften, and you will know when it's ready once you see it start to break apart. So as you can see, it already started breaking apart, and as I put the fork into the cassava, you can see it goes right in. I would leave it for just like about 3 more minutes before I remove it off of the stove. In front of me I have a pot on, and I am just going to add a little bit of olive oil. So about 2 tablespoons I'm going to add in here. It's about 1. Right, about that much. And then I'm going to add about 3 tablespoons of sugar, granulated sugar. If you do have brown sugar, you can also use that as well. And I'm just going to mix the sugar with the oil, and this is going to start the browning process. And to brown the pork, what it does, it helps to give the meat color, for those who are not familiar with what the browning process is all about. So you're just going to leave this, and as time progresses, it's going to start changing in color, and I will show you exactly which color. I usually wait for it to turn before I add the meat in the pot. So you want to make sure and stand close to the pot when you're doing this. As you can see, it started getting a bit brown in color. I am just allowing it to get a little bit darker before I add the pork to it. So you just want to constantly keep stirring. Okay, so now that I'm satisfied with the color, I am going to add the pork to it. And what you want to do is you want to start stirring the pork. Next, I'm going to add 1 cup of water. And then I'm just going to cover this halfway with the lid and allow it to cook a little. I will also be adding some coconut milk to it, which is optional. So now I'm just going to put the lid on there and leave it for about 10 minutes before I add the coconut milk. Now I'm going to add the coconut milk. And as you can see, the meat springs water. So as you can see, the water is a lot more than when I first poured that first cup of water. So I'm just going to mix everything around. And it smells so good. Next, what I'm going to do is add a little bit of salt. So I will be using just half teaspoon of salt. Not sure if you can see it, but I'm using half teaspoon because we already used salt and a lot of different seasoning when we were seasoning the meat. So you want to be careful adding any extra salt and stuff like that. Next, I'm just going to sprinkle a little bit of this is the all-purpose seasoning from Maggi. So I'm going to add just a dash of that into the pot as well. About that much should be fine. And again, I'm going to cover it and let it finish cooking so that the water in the pot can dry up a little bit more, or dry out a little more, I should say. For the pork, I forgot to mention that it will take about 35 to 40 minutes to cook. I usually use like this Le Creuset pot, which is like a heavy iron pot, and this really cooks the meat fast, and it also cooks the meat to the point where it is really soft and tender, just how I like it. So if you are using just a regular pot, it may take a little longer for the meat to cook. The pork is completely finished cooking and it is soft and tender, and this has been on the stove for about 40 minutes. So now what I'm going to do is just put the lid onto the pot and start cooking the cassava next. Now that I have the pork on the fire cooking and the cassava still on the stove cooking, I'm going to start preparing the ingredients for the cassava. So I'm going to remove the skin off of the onion, the garlic, as well as remove the ends off of the scallion. In front of me I have 1 bundle of the scallion. I also have about 10 cloves of the garlic and 1 onion. So I'm just going to start cutting this up. I'm just going to cut this really thinly. So I end up just using about 3/4 of the onion. So I have that in here. I already cut up the scallion. Next I have the garlic. I do not like tasting chunks of garlic when I'm eating. So what I usually do is I use a grater. And I am going to use this side of the grater to grate the garlic. And I have about 10 cloves of garlic here. Now that I'm finished with the garlic, now I'm going to drain the cassava so that we can start making the butter cassava. So you can use a strainer to strain the cassava, or if you have something like this, you can use this and just slowly scoop it out of the water like this and place it into the strainer. So you can wait a while for the cassava to cool a bit. What you have to make sure and remove from the cassava, in the center of the cassava you will see something that looks like this. So you want to make sure and remove this before you start slightly mashing the cassava. So again, wait for it to cool a bit because it's extremely hot right now. Now that it is cool somewhat, it's still hot, but I am going to proceed with removing the pieces. So again, here is another piece. So in the pot I'm going to put about 5 tablespoons of olive oil. And to that I am also going to add 4 tablespoons of butter. And allow that to melt a bit. Make sure the stove is on medium. Next I'm going to add the garlic and the onions. So first I'm putting the onions in there. And next I'm adding the garlic. Next I'm going to add the scallion. and allow that to cook for about 1 minute before I add the cassava. Before I start adding the cassava, I am just going to put about half teaspoon of salt and quarter teaspoon of ground black pepper. And next I'm going to start adding the cassava. So this is the end product. I added a little bit more olive oil because it was just a tad bit too dry. Again, you can also add a little bit more salt if you prefer, and that's it. So let me plate it for you guys to see the final look. Here is the final plating of today's dish. And usually my husband is the one who helps record the cooking videos. Unfortunately, he is not here today. He's on work. So if there's any bit of shakiness in the video, I apologize. It's just me alone. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Once again, thanks for viewing, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye.